Last night, Kyiv was rocked by a massive Russian missile and drone attack, leaving the city in chaos. But Ukraine's revenge was instant and brutal, striking deep into Russian territory, including key oil infrastructure that fuels Moscow's war machine. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Europe was blindsided, cut out of critical US-led Ukraine peace talks, reportedly to avoid too many cooks, according to US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll. From the skies over Kyiv to the halls of Geneva diplomacy, the stakes have never been higher. Tonight, we break down Russia's attacks, Ukraine's counterstrikes, the sidelining of Europe in peace talks, and Moscow's long game that threatens to divide the West. On November 29, 2025, Kyiv endured one of the most intense attacks since the war began. At least 2 people were killed and 37 others injured, including a child. Local residents described explosions echoing through the city as Russia launched hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, including Kinzhal hypersonic strikes. Air raid alerts were active for hours, stretching Ukraine's air defenses to their limits. The Ukrainian Air Force intercepted the majority of incoming threats, shooting down 558 drones and 19 missiles, but not before several multi-story residential buildings were damaged across Kyiv's districts, including Svyatoshinsky, Dniprovsky, Darnitsky, Shevchenkivsky, and Solomiansky. Fires broke out in at least 6 apartment buildings, displacing hundreds of civilians and causing substantial destruction. Meanwhile, Ukraine struck back swiftly and strategically. In southern Russia, the Afipsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai, one of Moscow's largest, came under attack. The refinery processes 6.25 million tons of oil annually, supplying diesel and aviation fuel to Russian forces on the front lines. Explosions and fires were reported on the site, disrupting logistics and sending a clear message. Ukrainian retaliation is instant and brutal. By targeting both civilians and critical infrastructure, Moscow aims to terrorize and destabilize. Ukraine, however, has demonstrated that it can project power deep into Russian territory. The dual reality of missile barrages over Kyiv and strategic strikes inside Russia underscores a brutal truth. The war is no longer confined to the battlefield. It is now a multidimensional conflict, fought in the air, on the ground, and through infrastructure sabotage. The strike on Afipsky is not merely retaliation. It is a strategic assault on the backbone of Russia's war machine. Energy fuels modern warfare, from tanks rolling across the Donbass to fighter jets patrolling the skies. Fuel is the lifeblood of Moscow's military operations. The Afipsky refinery is more than a plant. It's a logistics hub feeding Russian forces with diesel and aviation kerosene, making it a natural target. By striking it, Ukraine forces Moscow to reroute supplies, slow operations, and dedicate resources to protect other vulnerable infrastructure. Commander Oleksandr Syrsky noted that Kyiv's strikes on the oil sector have severely disrupted fuel supplies and logistics for Moscow's armed forces. Beyond military impact, attacking oil refineries hits Russia economically. Oil and gas revenues fund the war and support domestic stability. By crippling refineries and fuel depots, Ukraine is weakening Moscow's military, squeezing its economy, and sending a political signal. Continued aggression comes at a cost. These strikes are part of Ukraine's asymmetric warfare strategy. Conventional battlefields may favor Russia in certain regions, but precise attacks on energy infrastructure demonstrate that strategic leverage can be gained far from front lines. Every refinery, fuel depot, and logistical hub attacked is a reminder Moscow's resources are not invulnerable, and Ukraine can project power into Russian territory. In short, if Russia wants to sustain its war, it must first defend the very infrastructure that makes it possible. Ukraine is proving that the lifelines of Russia's war machine are vulnerable, turning logistics and energy into potent instruments of resistance. While Kyiv burned and Ukraine struck back, Europe was blindsided. European leaders discovered that the Trump administration had drafted a 28-point peace plan for Ukraine, and they learned about it from news headlines, not official briefings. Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany first heard of the plan in shock. Calls were placed late into the night to set up conversations with President Trump, but by then, the content had already created widespread alarm. Leaked details revealed that the framework would force Ukraine to cede territory, limit its military, and forego NATO membership, handing Moscow far more than it had captured on the battlefield. European diplomats scrambled to respond. Officials from Germany, France, Britain, and Italy rushed from G20 meetings in Johannesburg to Geneva, trying to influence U.S. negotiators in real time. Former NATO chief Anders Fogh Rasmussen remarked that Europe had gone from a coalition of the willing to a coalition of the waiting. This episode highlighted a critical vulnerability. Europe could no longer assume the United States would act in coordination with its traditional allies. The sudden exposure of the plan forced Europe into a high-pressure diplomatic maneuver, racing against time to mitigate provisions that heavily favored Russia, preserve Ukraine's defense, and maintain transatlantic credibility. It became evident that information and access are just as critical as military firepower. In today's geopolitics, being sidelined can carry consequences as severe as losing a battlefield, and Europe had just experienced a stark lesson in the price of exclusion. Beyond shock, there was a clear strategy by Washington. Europe was deliberately sidelined. The U.S. sought to negotiate directly with Kyiv, and in some cases, Moscow, without consulting the continent most affected by the conflict. Officials described this as avoiding too many cooks, suggesting European countries were too close to Kyiv to remain neutral. The consequences were serious. European proposals, like deploying peacekeepers and managing billions in frozen Russian assets, were excluded from initial discussions. The plan threatened to reshape post-war Ukraine and European security without European input. Diplomats from Germany, France, Britain, and Italy traveled urgently from Johannesburg to Geneva to influence talks. One European official summarized the situation. If Europe's leaders wanted to regain a seat at the table, they needed to engage and to speak with one voice. Silence could hand Moscow a victory. Outright opposition risked alienating Washington. This maneuver exposed tensions within the transatlantic alliance. While the U.S. viewed the talks as a historic opportunity, Europe worried about its influence over a war affecting its own borders. The sidelining of Europe risked enabling a plan that could limit Ukraine's military, reshape borders, and constrain NATO, highlighting that even close allies can find themselves excluded from critical decisions. The U.S. decision to cut Europe out was not just a misstep, it had strategic ramifications. It forced Europe into a reactive position, scrambling to modify the plan, and illustrated how diplomacy, like military action, can shape the battlefield. Even as Washington pushed its plan, Moscow remained cautious, contradictory, and strategic. Despite the peace framework favoring Russia, Moscow gave no clear indication it would accept it. Emily Harding observed, "They've been very coy about the negotiations and what they would accept as a settlement." Leaked conversations suggest that the Kremlin even influenced the draft, ensuring it aligned with Russian objectives while appearing to originate from Washington. Kirill Dmitriev instructed, "And let them do like their own peace plan. But I don't think they'll take exactly our version, but at least it'll be as close to it as possible." The plan would have forced Ukraine to cede territory, limit alliances, and reduce its army, a framework experts call tantamount to surrender. Pierre Heroque warned, most of its provisions aim to weaken and isolate Ukraine, which risked facilitating or even encouraging further aggression. As revisions were made, Sergei Lavrov stated that if the amended plan reflected fewer of Russia's demands, Moscow would treat it as fundamentally different and unacceptable. Putin emphasized maximalist goals, including recognizing Crimea and Donbass as Russian, and insisted that Ukrainian troop withdrawal was essential. Analysts conclude that Russia's goal is not peace, but leverage. Strain Kyiv's relations with allies, divide the West, and maintain strategic flexibility. Russia's approach is methodical. Delay allows it to adjust economically and militarily. Distract shifts attention from diplomatic failures to intense missile attacks on Kyiv. Divide targets fractures within the West, exploiting the US-Europe tension exposed by the Trump plan. By keeping negotiations ambiguous and contradictory, Moscow maintains the initiative, forcing Ukraine and its allies to react rather than set the pace. Alexa Drachuik explains, Russia uses this strategy to weaken US support for Ukraine, divide the US and Europe, and push for a security order shaped by Washington and Moscow. The result is a long-game approach where every strike, leak, and delay is part of a broader strategic chessboard designed to buy time, manipulate allies, and maintain leverage. Above all, Moscow seeks to break Western unity. NATO, EU sanctions, and coordinated arms deliveries are Russia's greatest threats. A fractured West would slow sanctions, weaken military aid, and allow Russia to dictate post-war conditions. Trump's unilateral plan provided Moscow a perfect opportunity to foster mistrust between Washington and Europe. By sidelining European leaders, the Kremlin has exploited divisions, testing how far the US and Europe can act cohesively. Breaking unity doesn't require collapse, just enough fragmentation to slow decisions. With Europe scrambling and Ukraine under attack, Moscow maintains strategic leverage. Every missile, every leaked plan, every ambiguous negotiation is calculated to widen the cracks. Ultimately, Russia wants leverage, not peace. Its goals are: Number 1. Territorial consolidation, recognition of Crimea and Donbass, Ukrainian troop withdrawals, elections favorable to Moscow. Putin, signing documents with the Ukrainian leadership is pointless. I believe the Ukrainian leadership made a fundamental, strategic mistake when it was afraid to hold a presidential election, after which the president lost his legitimate status. Number 2. Political manipulation of the West, using Trump's peace plan to drive wedges between the US, Europe, and Ukraine. Number 3. Time and economic resilience, delaying sanctions, protecting internal stability, and maintaining resources. Orisia Letsevich, Moscow is buying time in order to delay sanctions and to adjust by finding ways to avoid damaging consequences for its economy and stability of the system. Number 4. Narrative control, portraying Ukraine as uncooperative, undermining its credibility, and eroding support among allies. Russia's strategy is multifaceted. Military pressure, diplomatic manipulation, and economic resilience converge to advance Moscow's long-term goals. Peace is secondary. Leverage and division are primary. The war in Ukraine is no longer just a battlefield, it's a high-stakes geopolitical chess match. From Kyiv under relentless Russian strikes to Ukraine's precise retaliation deep inside Russia, every move is designed to weaken, disrupt, and pressure Moscow. Diplomatically, Europe was cut out of US-led peace talks. The Kremlin remains coy and maximalist, and Russia's ultimate goal is clear: break Western unity, reshape Ukraine on its terms, and buy time. Every delay, distraction, and divide is part of Moscow's strategy to keep Kyiv and its allies off balance. For Ukraine and the West, the stakes could not be higher. Unity, strategy, and decisive action are essential, not just for Ukraine's future, but for European security. One thing is certain: this war will continue to test diplomacy, military strategy, and transatlantic resilience, and the world will be watching every move.